to thank Horizon for its continued support of the Maryland Life Sciences Bioinnovation Conference.
At the beginning of everything in Horizon R&D is doing our best scientific assessment of what places we're going to be able to potentially have a meaningful impact on human disease.
Not only do we try and look and discover new molecules, but once you get something and it's proven to be safe and effective, you want to look where else you can utilize it.
It's about the patient understanding their disease, their pathobiology, and identifying the right pathways. You can see the opportunities to develop medicines that would best address the fundamental origins of disease, perhaps not just in one autoimmune disease, but perhaps in many.
That patient is always part of the conversation within R&D. That's what really differentiates our approach, in that there's a patient that we are aiming to serve at the end of the journey.
Our next panel will explore the steps industry can take to remove structural barriers to employment experienced by under-resourced communities. Please welcome your moderator, Kevin Beverly, Chair of the Universities of Shady Grove.
With me, and our panelists have been seated, so thank you for that. First, again, let me just reintroduce myself. Kevin Beverly, Chair of the University of Shady Grove Board of Advisors. I also sit as the Chair of the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation, former CEO of a company called Social and Scientific Systems here in Montgomery County. Let me introduce my panelists for you. First, I have Maurice Jones, President and Chief Executive Officer of 110. Ann Kadamian, who's the Executive Director at Universities at Shady Grove. Marty Rosendale, Chief Executive Officer of Maryland Life Sciences. And Yamina Leggett-Wells, who's the Senior Director of Alliance Management at Horizon. So as the voiceover said to us, what our intent to do today is to look at the issues around diversity in our industries. I think the last session that you just listened to gave an understanding of some of the workforce challenges and how we're trying to build that pipeline. But one of the things that we recognize over time is that that pipeline has looked the same for a long time. And we have to look at how we think about diversity. And I'll just say this, in recent years, companies have been forced to rethink their approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're recognizing that it's more than a needed social initiative, but also a requirement for employee recruitment and retention. And there's an increased body of research that shows that the more diverse a company is, they'll succeed. And the less diverse companies, their counterparts, are not as profitable and actually don't perform as well. So let's start with our first question. I'll pose it and put it out there to our educator in the room. What do you see as the key obstacles facing us as we work to improve in this area?
So I think that's me. Thanks, Kevin.
Yes.
Hi, everyone. I think that there are a lot of obstacles here, and we'll talk more about some of the findings from a recent symposium that we did at the Universities at Shady Grove that our Board of Advisors led. But we need to think about this systemically. The obstacles to greater diversity in STEM is really a systemic challenge, and it's a challenge that's going to require deep partnership with business, taking a holistic approach to how we think about access to education, affordability, and support and retention throughout education. So there are many obstacles, from mentoring to the culture around STEM, and a culture that begins as early as middle school and high school that can be exclusive and harsh. So really thinking about how we make those cultures more inclusive, how we support teachers to be better mentors in this area, a deeper understanding of the STEM community, and how we think about, again, the affordability and the access as well. So I think that the obstacles are significant, and the way we approach them has got to be systemically, again, thinking across a pathway. Some of the work we're doing at the universities at Shady Grove is to take an ecosystem approach to how we think about access and affordability, particularly in the area of STEM and diversity in STEM. And that means working with our public school partners, Montgomery County Public Schools, working with our community college partners, Montgomery College, Frederick Community College, and other community colleges, and working with our 9 university partners at the universities at Shady Grove to think about how students can enter into a pathway, their preparation along the way, and the support they receive along the way, the experiential learning they receive along the way, the mentoring and coaching they receive along the way. In a big picture, Kevin, I think it really is a systemic challenge, and we have to think about the obstacles along the way, but do it in partnership. And I'll come back to this point later on, but it really is a deep partnership with business, I think, that's required to really tackle this, the challenge of not only the education pipeline, but of course, moving into the workforce and beyond.
So let's stay on that partnership point. And now I'll ask one of our industry members, Yamina, when you think about what partnerships are the partnerships that are missing?
Absolutely, and I think at Horizon, that's one of the things that we are doing is we're taking an intentional focus to focus on diversity, inclusion, equity, and allyship. And our culture and approach at Horizon takes many forms. One of them is that we collaborate. We collaborate both internally with our employees, but we also collaborate externally with academic institutions, and more importantly, with the people that we aim to serve, so our patients as well as individuals in the medical and life sciences field. We also take an entrepreneurial mindset in everything that we do. And so while we're looking entrepreneurially to advance our pipeline, we're also looking to see what are the things that we need to do to be creative. And so working with our employees and working with others that we're going to be serving with our drugs, we have to have that creativity there as well. And all of this plays into ultimately the retention of our employees and also the trust that our community has in delivering the drugs. Horizon is a rare therapeutics company, and so many of the drugs that we develop served underrepresented populations. So it's important that we have employees who also represent the demographics of those that we're serving. And then finally, I think personally, this is something that was key to me in being a Horizon employee is authenticity. Being able to show up at work as your true and whole self. And so we support all of those through a number of programs at Horizon. Our CEO, Tim Walbert, is really focused and has always been focused on doing the right thing. And so what does that look like at Horizon? At Horizon, you may have heard this yesterday, 70% of our scientists are women. 25% of our board of directors are women. 40% of our leadership are women. And so we have that intentional focus on diversity, equity, inclusion, and allyship throughout everything that we do.
Thank you. That's a great answer. Maurice, question that maybe you add on to this is, so there are a lot of surveys out there that show that many historically disadvantaged groups are just really disproportionately underrepresented in many industries. Obviously, life sciences is not excluded. What are you doing, or what do you see businesses doing to address some of the obstacles to getting these groups more into the workforce?
Sure. Well, in addition to what the panelists have already highlighted, what we are seeing businesses do in a much more aggressive fashion, and frankly, in a really encouraging way from my perspective, is to really look at, identify, and remove the systemic barriers that the businesses themselves have imposed that have been harmful in trying to bring in talent from all backgrounds. So let me give you one example. The notion of the 4-year degree being the gold standard that is the credential that you have to have in order to enter into our great enterprises is one that is right now being revisited in an aggressive way. And if you look at the data, you see why. If you look at the workforce today and you look at all Black talent, for example, over the age of 70, over the age of 25, what you see is 79% of us, or I should correct that, 76% of us do not yet have a 4-year degree. We've got other credentials, we've got other work experience, we've got skills galore, but not a 4-year degree. That percentage is about 83% for Latinx. It's about 66% for whites in the workforce, ages 25 and above. And if you look across all demographics, it's about 66% of all workers ages 25 and above in the workforce today do not yet have a 4-year degree. And yet, when you look at jobs that are quality jobs, when you look at jobs that pay $60,000 and above, what you see is that on paper, 79% of them require that you have a 4-year degree. So you've got this literally credential that may be unrelated to the skills needed to do the job, unrelated to the skills of the talent, that is literally a barrier to one earning their way into the middle class. And so one of the encouraging things that you're seeing businesses do is to actually revisit this notion of where the 4-year degree is needed and really focus on what are the skills that we need on day one to do that job, and what are the multiple pathways that a talent may come about getting those skills. And let's make sure that we are open to those multiple pathways. And so the re-credentialing, the removal of systemic barriers, in particular these credentials that may not be related to skills, and the move to a skills-first culture is really something that I'm seeing in the business world that is quite encouraging, and that is definitely going to lead to a more diverse workforce that is retained better, and frankly, that is productive in helping us grow all across the board.
Kevin, if I may, I'd like to add to what Maurice said.
Yeah, go ahead.
Recently, as a part of the BioHub, we had an opportunity to bring together a coalition of industry members to talk about the skills that they needed in their workforce. And they came to the conclusion, as Maurice points out, that many of these jobs, particularly in biomanufacturing, didn't require a 4-year degree. And in many cases, that requirement had been taken off of the job description. But what they discovered about their own companies at that point was there was still a bias to hire people with that 4-year degree, even though it was no longer in the job description and no longer a requirement. And so it's more than just making the physical change of the job description. It truly is about culture and about really accepting that skills focus, versus that degree focus.
So Marty, let me stay with you on this point, because recently the University of Shady Grove Board of Advisors held an action leadership symposium on STEM and really focused on minorities and women in the life sciences and STEM occupations. I'd appreciate it, and I know Ann has some comments, she mentioned this earlier, would appreciate it if you would share some of the highlights of that meeting. What did we learn?
Sure. Well, I can share what I learned, Kevin. I don't know if I can share what everybody learned. First of all, I think it was a phenomenal opportunity. The group that got together, the panel that discussed the issues, I thought was tremendous. A number of things that came out of it. First of all, the need to drive more people towards STEM, help them understand what the opportunities are, get to people early to help them understand where these high-paying jobs are, and get more involved and more driving that communication, if you will. But there was also a focus on data that I thought was interesting that came out of that conversation. And this is something that I've struggled with a bit, because at the Tech Council, as an industry trade association, it's our mission to help our members succeed. So we've been looking at how do we do that with respect to inclusivity, equity, and diversity. And what we've done is we've taken a focus that there are companies out there developing technologies that can support other companies in this area, can help them with inclusivity, can help them with equity. And so we've put out an RFI looking to identify those companies, and then we can help promote what they do. But the idea here is, at least in my mind, and Maurice and I have talked about this, I think he probably knows where I'm going with this, but diversity is something that's easy to measure, right? Diversity is a ratio. Diversity is a number. Equity and inclusivity becomes much more difficult to measure. Now, you can measure it in terms of how many people get promoted. You can measure it in terms of employee retention and employee satisfaction. But it's more challenging to measure in a meaningful way. And I think that need for data and data analysis was one of the things that came out of that symposium as well.
So there are a lot of traditional institutions that are in the middle of this. You've got an education ecosystem, and I'm interested to have you all talk about what the real role of that education ecosystem is in this process of making sure that we're truly getting the best and the brightest, not only from our majority population, but from our minority populations, to stay engaged in the STEM careers. Anne, you want to take a shot at that to start us off?
Sure. I do believe it's an ecosystem challenge, as I noted in my earlier comments. And I think all education institutions have a responsibility to not only collaborate, but to center the student in the work that we're doing. So I think it's also a mind shift in the way we think about the challenge. It's not just about connecting our institutions. It's about building processes and pathways and opportunities that put students at the center of what we're doing. So, I'll use a metaphor that might be helpful. Traditionally, when we've shopped, we've gone to the mall. So you get to the mall, you get to a giant parking lot, you schlep through the parking lot, you get to a kiosk or some type of a sign, you try to find a number of stores that might have what you need, you hike all around the mall looking for what you might need, you find maybe the scarf or the pair of pants you need, but they don't quite fit, they're not the right color, but you're tired, and so you take it anyway and you go home, right? Or you can go on your Amazon app and you can get exactly what you need and it comes to your door. Well, in higher education, we make students go to the mall instead of shopping on Amazon, right? We find ways to help students across all the valleys and the financial challenges and all of the issues and the transfer and all these things. But why don't we just build a better pathway? Why don't we build something that's a little bit more student-centered? And so I think, Kevin, our biggest challenge is to go from an individual institutional mindset where we're all rewarded for our USA Today rankings or for exclusivity of the institution, and really start focusing on how we build pathways that center the student, especially diverse students in STEM. I think that this is the challenge we all have. And so it's working together as an ecosystem. I'll also, though, build on Maurice's really interesting points about moving to a skills-based focus in this. I think that higher education and business have a lot of work to do to work better together in this effort. And that means not only academia being more inclusive and bringing business into conversations about curriculum development and skills-based development, but also, business working more closely with academia and understanding where there are those needs for a four-year degree or a master's degree, and how we can create opportunities so it's not only skills development, but as people want to grow and develop in an organization, where does the bachelor's come in? Where does the master's come in? And so thinking more about that collaboration, deepening that collaboration is going to be a real institutional challenge, I think, Kevin.
I agree with you. I think at Horizon, we've created what we call RISE communities. And it's our attempt at trying to address some of those gaps that we see with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. One of the things that the RISE communities focus on is development and training, right? And so how do we partner with academic institutions like yours to have those synergies so that at the end of the day, we have strong talent that's coming from your academic institution, as well as we have employees who meet the needs of the company. And ultimately, right, our end goal is that we produce important drugs, right, that help patients. So it's a win-win for everyone for us to focus on these aspects collectively, collaboratively together to get things done. And I think what we're seeing is that when you have good employee engagement, when you have good partnerships, that everybody wins, right? And so we need to do more of that, particularly in the Maryland area, where we have a wealth of life science institutions, and we have a wealth of very good academic institutions as well. We need to find ways to further develop those even more than we have, right, to get those synergies.
Thank you. You actually anticipated my next question and answered it, so kind of. So when you think about these gaps and you're trying to measure whether you're making success, what are some of the indicators that help you believe you're actually making the changes that you need? Now, I'll ask Maurice to comment on that first, but I'd love other comments as well.
Look, you do need to continue to track hires. You need to continue to track retention. You need to really focus on promotion, particularly internal promotion. But, you know, I think there are other things that are indicators of some of the cultural changes needed to be looking at. So we, for example, in our coalition, we actually track the percentage of jobs that both pay a living wage and don't require a four-year degree, right? We're tracking how well companies are actually doing with respect to moving those barriers into engaging in the kind of business practices needed to really create the cultural piece. We're tracking, for example, what companies are doing with respect to utilizing and establishing and growing employee resource groups across a bunch of demographics and other subject areas. We're tracking the way in which employees respond on surveys of engagement or net promoter scores. So I think there are a number of things that you can track in the way of proxies. We're also trying to track the training that employees are receiving when it comes to bias, implicit bias, and other bias. Those are the kinds of things that I think you can track when it comes to trying to get a hold of, to a point people were making earlier. You got to get a hold of the business practices, but you also got to get a sense of the cultural progress or lack thereof that you're making. And so really important to track as much as you can sentiment and attitudes and a sense of the kinds of investment and champions and training of particularly folks who are doing the hiring and folks who are leading the people, because that's where the culture really gets transmitted and that's where the culture is changed or not.
So let's go to this communication piece. You just raised something that's hit a nerve with me. So it's about 97% of employers have introduced new measures this past year to try and introduce some new things around DEI. But only 24% of employees believe that their employees have done anything. So there's a misalignment of communication there. I'm trying to think about, from the business side, how are companies going to deal with that? The fact that they're doing things, but it's not being recognized.
So I'm going to comment on one thing and then I'll pass it on.
Yeah.
What people are looking for are the tangible things, right? And so you've got to have this mix of tangible plus intangible for folks to really get a feel that progress is being made. So it's interesting in our coalition, the fact that we track and report on hires and promotions and removal of four-year degree requirements is really, really powerful for giving people a sense of whether things are actually happening, right? And so what you find businesses doing is finding the tangible and the intangible to track and report on. And I think to really give the employees a sense of progress being made, you have to have both.
So Marty, I'm going to ask you to kind of follow up on that. Is, you know, being an advocacy organization for the field, what are some of the frustrations on this communication piece that you're hearing from the business community? How are they dealing with this? We're doing something, but it's not being recognized.
Well, I think there's a couple of things that I would bring up. First of all, if a business is just looking at diversity, then the employees are going to feel that, and if the culture hasn't changed, and to some of Maurice's points, if the culture hasn't changed, if they can't see the company being more inclusive, if they can't see the steps that are being taken to be more equitable, if they can't feel that, if they can't see it, then that's going to make it hard for them to believe that change is actually happening. Now, that said, it is tough to change a company culture. It's not, you can't just wake up one morning and say, I'm going to change our culture and go into the office and change it, right? It takes a long time. It'll take changes in management. It'll take a lot of effort. And so that can be exhausting. So companies will start down a path, and then it just becomes too much to handle. It becomes too difficult. This is coming back to the Tech Council's Technology Inclusivity Initiative. We're trying to identify those tools, those things that companies can use to help them make this kind of change, to help them monitor what they're doing, to help facilitate this kind of change, because it's significant and it does take a lot of effort. And if there are tools that can help measure, that can help promote, that's important. And then, I am an old sales executive myself. It's constant communication. You constantly have to sell it. You have to talk to your employees. They need to know what you're doing. You have to remind them it's a sales process, and you have to stay on top of it, and continually sell that to the staff. And that's a part of the changing culture as well.
Kevin,
so we can go. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in on the point that Maurice was making about what we measure really matters in culture, and Marty's point as well. And I think one of the findings in the report that came out of the symposium at the universities at Shady Grove on STEM diversity was around mentorship and really encouraging mentorship. But one of the ways you encourage mentorship is to make mentorship part of your job responsibilities. Be held accountable for it. And so building in expectations, building in measures that can really start to move the needle. We talked earlier about traditional higher education. Institutions all across the country, have 4,000 different institutions in higher education. They are held accountable, or they are kind of aspiring to certain rankings and indicators of their success, and everyone works really hard towards those. But imagine if we started, making those indicators much more, moving the needle much more towards how not only diversity but equity and inclusion in STEM, in particular fields, holding faculty and even teachers throughout the education system more accountable for their mentorship, putting that into employee requirements in any kind of biotechnology or STEM related business, so that mentoring and fellow employees becomes part of the responsibility as well. So I do think what we measure and what we hold people accountable for matters a great deal in how we start to change culture.
So again, to the business leaders around what Ann just said, around this mentorship activity. And one of the things that I think came out of the USG symposium was the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. Mentorship, we talk about it, and everybody's got mentor programs, but they're passive. And so how do you move from an environment where you're not only just giving that individual some advice, but you're truly helping them truly build a career, that transition from mentorship to sponsorship? You want to take that one, Maurice?
So I'll comment on it. So the companies that are doing the best in this coalition that is 110 are the ones who are definitely investing in both mentors and sponsors. That sponsor is the one who is advocating for you when you're not in the room, to make sure that you are on people's radar when you're not even in the room. And everybody needs a sponsor. You particularly need a sponsor if you're going to break through on the DE and I space. So there is absolutely a lot of work and a lot of opportunity in that area. And the ones who are actually doing it aggressively are the ones who I think are seeing the most progress. But let me just add one other piece here. What we find as the game changer in all of this is leadership, right? How much does, the saying is what gets measured gets done. And the leader, when the great leaders are launching new products and launching new services, right? They got all kinds of ways of staying on top of what's happening with that new product offering, metrics that they're getting, reports on, holding people accountable. I mean, it's the essence of leadership of an enterprise. This should be the same way. You have to have leadership from the highest levels on DEI performance to really, really see it take off and to sustain it. And the places where we see that happening are making progress.
Yamina, would you comment, because I'm interested to know, as you talked about Horizon, do you make a distinction between mentorship and sponsorship?
Absolutely. And I agree with what Maurice said. I think we have that leadership within our CEO, as I mentioned before, right? We have an intentional focus on everything that we do as a company, and he's very committed to making sure that, Horizon is an organization, the preeminent organization for women and underrepresented talent. And he's actually stated that publicly. And so what does that look like? I think about Dr. Freeman Habrowski, who's the president emeritus of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, and the program that he had, very successful Meyerhoff Scholars Program that he had to develop underrepresented students in the STEM fields. And if you ever get a chance to listen to his TED Talk, he talks about really 4 pillars of success. And I think that those 4 pillars of success can also be applied to the workplace in the discussion that we're having today. The first pillar is set expectations. So, as a company, we need to set expectations across all levels of engagement in terms of what we're doing and why we're doing it and the benefits. The second pillar is around building community. The third pillar is around providing hands-on experiences. So that's where that mentorship and that sponsorship component comes in. These individuals have the skill set to do well, but they need the mentorship and the sponsorship in order to shine, right? And then the fourth pillar is really around leadership involvement and having our leaders to help us to advance those things that are important within the organization. So I think as an organization, Horizon has really, over the years, done a good job of, number one, measuring where we were, and then making the shift to ensure that we are more equitable in what we're doing, and then also putting into place additional activities, supports, programs, and communicating to meet each one of those key pillars. And it's helped us to flourish as an organization, and we don't have a difficult time attracting the right type of talent that we need to fit our needs because of that.
Thank you. So my understanding is there's a mic in the audience there, and again, this is such a rich conversation, and I would love to hear from some of the leaders in the audience any questions they might have for the panel. Has anything been stimulated in your minds and challenged you to rethink how you're thinking about this? We'd love to hear from you. So if you've got a question or comment, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
So, Kevin, I don't see anybody walking up to the mic at the moment while we're waiting to see. Well, I take that back. We have somebody coming over to ask a question.
Okay.
Thank you very much for this. This has been a really fabulous presentation, and I'm really excited about it. I'm Lynn Stein-Bencion. I'm with Montgomery County Economic Development. Our organization has been on this journey as well, and we're very pleased to be on it. I was a little surprised, Marty, you did not talk about the Tech Council's DEI in Action Pledge opportunity, and so now I'm handing it to you.
Thank you, Lynn. So as part of the Technology Inclusivity Initiative, I talked about the RFI that we put out, the search for technology companies that can have a positive impact on DEI. But we also did ask our members to take a pledge, and that pledge is a pledge to inclusivity, equity, and diversity, but it's also a pledge to take action. And we gave them, assuming that some companies wouldn't quite know what actions they could take, we gave them a long list of actions that they could take, and we asked them to select 3. So we've had a good response to that. We intend to get those pledge takers together later, and bring them together, have a conversation about how well it's worked, the actions that they've taken, anything else that they may have done. But it is a big part of that Technology Inclusivity Initiative. Lynn, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Kevin, we have another question here in just a second.
Yeah, Tyler Rowe with Copeland Williams Construction. So in the sports world, right, NCAA, they've made NIL deals for student athletes. Is there a future where companies do NIL deals with up-and-coming scientists and students in that type of world?
I suppose anything's possible. You'd want to be sure that it was done in a very inclusive and equitable way, and to really give opportunity across the board. I will just take your opening, though, and make another sports analogy, if I may. And that is that some of the work we've been doing at the universities at Shady Grove has been inspired by the work of Angela Ruggiero, who is a former Olympic ice hockey champion who created the Sports Innovation Lab. And the Sports Innovation Lab was created to try to understand the future of fandom and focusing on how fans are changing. They're becoming more fluid in their use of social media and their engagement, their creation of content. And they're not traditional fans who are going to a game and buying season tickets and following that team for their whole life and following as their family did, and so on and so on. And there's an interesting analogy there to students and future students. If you look at today's students in higher education, 74% of the students today in higher education are non-traditional. They have family responsibilities, they're working, they are financing their own education. Many are first in their family to go to college. These are the students, the diverse student population that we need to serve in higher education. And so figuring out how to do a better job, not only higher education, but also business, in serving the students who are now, their lives are more fluid. They need to take some classes and work and come back and take some classes or get a credential. and we need to adjust our systems so that we can provide for that kind of fluidity and greater opportunity for students as well. So taking a page out of the sports book there, I will do that, but I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer to your interesting question.
Anyone else want to comment on his question?
You know, I'm still thinking about the notion of this scientist who would be advertising for somebody else. It's an intriguing thought, but I'm just joking. Just joking.
Having bioscience majors going pro early.
I like it.
Could be possible. Kevin, we do have another question here.
Yes,
Hi,
thank you.
Mark Shennerman from UMBC. The counties that are considered to be the leaders in STEM are also sort of the leaders in privilege. How do we turn that model upside down? How do we make Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Washington, D.C. be the leaders in STEM?
What a great question.
So from Horizon's standpoint, I can tell you about some of the work that we have done and that we'll continue to do, and that's really to reach out into the communities that we serve. Our employees spend a lot of time doing volunteer work and mentorship. We have a Horizon Scholars program that started in our office in Chicago area, but they're heavily involved with students in underserved populations. I think as we continue to grow here within the Maryland area, that's something that we will certainly look to do in some of those other areas outside of Montgomery County, right? We look at Baltimore, we look at Prince George's County, and even other areas where there may be underserved students who will benefit from our participation with them and for our investment in their future. Because ultimately, again, when we invest in their future, it benefits us in the longer term as well.
So if I could add to that, I know we have a number of representatives in the audience today that represent academic institutions, Montgomery College, Hood College, UMBC, USG. My observation, I know the student population at USG is very diverse. The student population at Montgomery College is diverse. I'm excited about those populations coming up and moving into the workforce. I think that's going to be important, and I think it represents greater diversity. Not to say we don't still have a lot of work to do, but I think the academic institutions have taken this seriously and have been working towards this for some time. I know, and I bring this up because in our work with the BioHub, one of my concerns is that we will build this amazing skilling, reskilling, and upskilling program, but we won't have people in the seats. And so I've been having conversations with academic institutions. I happen to sit on the advisory board for USG, so I've got to talk to my colleagues and peers there as well. And I'm finding that the academic institutions can make introductions for us to other associations that have the reach, the outreach, and can help us find people to sit in those seats. And I believe that's because they've been working on this issue for some time. And so what I'm seeing, it looks very promising. I think there's still a lot of work that we need to do, but what I'm seeing looks very promising.
Well, my leaders know there are improvements to be made. And as leaders continue to assess DEI within their organizations, it's clear that it's going to take more than effort. All right, we know effort's important, but it's going to take more than just effort. Communication and alignment are critical for the success that we need. The last question, I think, really is a great question for us all to ponder when we think about where the populations are and how much effort our business communities are investing in those areas versus looking for the right fruit. Where should we be fertilizing and creating that next great fruit? And when you think about Prince George's, you think about DC, you think about Baltimore City, those are rich minority populations that haven't had much exposure. And so how do business and the education institutions really start to dig in and make sure that we're not missing those talent bases.
Mm-hmm. So Kevin, I knew people just needed to digest the conversation, to think about questions. We're starting to get a cue with the microphone.
Yeah.
So please.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. Angela again from Bioagilytics and also the host of the Legal Drugs podcast. So at our company, a specialty CRO, one of the things we've done to assist with inclusion and diversity is we've attracted talent from a diverse place in a sense. And to retain that talent, we've started these affinity groups. So I would like to ask the panelists what your thoughts are on affinity groups. In some ways, for me, it feels, and I'm on the women's affinity group on the leadership board, it feels exclusive. And so what are your thoughts as far as companies across all industries having these sorts of groups for folks who may be the minority groups? Is it causing more harm than good? I just want to gain your perspective on that, truly. Thanks.
Similarly, at Horizon, we have affinity groups. We call them RISE. Those affinity groups do represent, various underrepresented populations, but the makeup of those groups is very diverse. And I think that goes back to kind of the culture in which we were organized as an organization. So even though you might have a women's affinity group, for example, we have men, women, everyone is participating in there. Our affinity groups are focused on, a variety of initiatives. And our aim is really to serve as a forum where we can have communication and where individuals can ensure that they are able to bring those diverse perspectives to the table, right? We often talk about, as an underrepresented group, I'm not always in the room to be able to have those conversations that sometimes I would like to have. The affinity groups, in some respects, serve that purpose because you're in a safe space where you can have those conversations with others who are supportive of you. And so I think it's just, again, a continuous process. We have to continue to push those barriers, and you start small and you'll build up to a point where I think you'll see some return on the work that you're doing.
I would just quickly add that most of the companies who are making progress in the 110 initiative have really strong employee resource groups that they leverage in all the ways that were just mentioned, both for expertise, for feedback, for communication, for help with rethinking how they're doing interviews and setting up interview panels. These ERGs are proving to be great resources on the DEI journey.
I'm getting a sign that I'm running out of time. So how about one last question if we have one from the audience?
We do, Kevin, yes.
Hi, I'm Kirsten Hildebrand from Children's National Hospital. I've been a clinical and now research operations administrator throughout my career. So when I hear the conversations about building the STEM pipeline, I agree with all the comments that you have made, but what I see missing is the other professionals that make up that STEM ecosystem. And these are professionals in research administration, communication, business, finance, intellectual property, regulatory science. So there's different career paths to get into this STEM career field. And so I'm asking the academic organizations here, what do you do to cross-fertilize interest in STEM? Do you bring your communications people in to talk about being a science communicator? Are you bringing in people from finance to look at the business enterprise that it takes to really support the global research enterprise and entrepreneurship? So thank you.
So fantastic question. And I will say I don't think we do enough to cross-fertilize. I think we often do think in terms of disciplinary buckets. One of the things we're doing at the universities at Shady Grove, part of our new strategic plan, is we are thinking about how we build pathways across sectors. But a lot of our conversation in our continuous whiteboard sessions about how to do this has been exactly to your point. How do you make sure that students who are in accounting and finance and communications and graphic design are seeing the opportunities across the sectors, not only in STEM and biotechnology, but in different businesses and public service and life sciences and health across the board. So a lot of our effort has been thinking about not only how we expose students to these other opportunities, but what we can do in the planning of the academic experience to ensure that students are exposed to a variety of different opportunities. We are experimenting with our entrepreneurship lab at Shady Grove, which is focused on building an entrepreneurial mindset. And that is a lab that is available. The programs are available to any student across Shady Grove and draws a very diverse set. So to this point, I think ensuring that we can do something similar as we move forward, we'll continue to work on that. But it's a great point, and we do get stuck in our disciplinary buckets oftentimes and forget about that cross-fertilization. So thank you for that.
I think we're looks like we're out of time, but I want to thank our panel for being great for this particular topic. It's followed very closely with the previous. This is a tough area, and I truly appreciate the candid responses and certainly appreciate the audience's participation in this. So without keeping you all from lunch too much longer, I'd like to again thank the panel for their participation in this, and wish you all a wonderful rest of the conference and afternoon.
So I've been asked to make a quick announcement before you leave. We decided that we're going to have a working lunch today. So we're going to take a short break. Go out, do a little bit of networking, take a break. We're going to bring the lunches into the room here, and then we're going to hold the workshop on raising capital, which is a very important workshop. I'm sure many of you think about raising capital frequently. So we'll hold that workshop here in this auditorium. We'll bring lunch in, and we'll make it a working lunch today. So thank you, everybody.